In a small town nestled beside the highway, the sound of distant traffic mixed with the quiet hum of everyday life. People in the town lived simple lives, often going about their routines without much interruption. The air was always filled with the scent of engine oil and grease, the unmistakable smell of a mechanic's garage. The mechanic, known for his steady hands and calm demeanor, ran a small shop near the edge of town. It wasn't the busiest place, but it was his pride and joy. He had a small team working with him, though he often worked alone, taking pride in every repair. The hours were long and the work was tough, but it suited him. It was a life he had chosen years ago, and one that had brought him peace. One afternoon, as he was closing up for the day, preparing to head home after a long shift, he noticed a young girl standing just outside the door to his shop. She was small, thin, with pale skin that stood out against the worn-out pavement. She looked fragile, almost as though she could be knocked over by a gust of wind. Her clothes were faded and she held a small stuffed animal in her hands, its fur worn thin from years of use. Her eyes, however, were what caught his attention. They were deep and dark. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag, watching her for a moment, unsure of why she was standing there. She didn't approach him, didn't speak. She just stood, staring at the shop with an intensity that seemed unnatural. He felt a pang of discomfort but shrugged it off. After all, there were all sorts of people in town. Maybe she was just waiting for someone, or perhaps she had lost her way. But as he turned to gather his things and lock up, she took a step toward him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was soft, almost fragile, like she was hesitant to speak at all. The mechanic stopped in his tracks, turning to face her.
"Can I help you?"
he asked, his tone gentle. He hadn't expected to hear from her, and the question felt odd, as if he were intruding on something that wasn't meant for him. She nodded slowly, then looked up at him with those dark eyes. "If you carry me upstairs, I'll tell you a secret," she said, her voice barely audible. The mechanic blinked, surprised by her words. He hadn't expected such a strange request. "Upstairs?" he repeated, his mind racing. There was an apartment above the shop, but he had never seen anyone up there, especially not a little girl. Her eyes held his for a long moment before she spoke again, this time a bit more firmly. "Please," she said softly, almost pleading. "I promise it's important." He didn't know what to make of it. What secret could a sick little girl possibly have? He couldn't help but feel drawn to her. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, that made him feel like this was no ordinary request. She wasn't like the usual people who came through his shop. Most of them were just looking for a quick fix or a cheap repair. This felt different, deeper somehow. After a long pause, the mechanic nodded, feeling a mix of confusion and curiosity. He couldn't explain why, but something in him told him to help her. He motioned for her to follow him and led her up the creaky stairs to the small apartment above the shop. The girl followed him quietly, her footsteps light and barely audible. As they reached the top, he opened the door to the small living room. It wasn't much. A few old chairs, a worn couch, and a small coffee table cluttered with papers. The place smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Not exactly the kind of place he would have chosen for himself, but it was home for now. He set the girl gently down on the couch, her small frame sinking into the cushions. She didn't seem to mind the worn fabric or the disarray of the room. She just sat there staring out the window, her eyes distant. For a moment, the mechanic stood there, unsure of what to do next. He was about to speak when the girl turned her gaze back to him. There was a sadness in her eyes, something deep that he couldn't quite place. "Why did you ask me to carry you upstairs?" he finally asked, his voice low. "What's the secret you want to tell me?" The girl's lips parted as if she was about to say something, but then she paused. It was as if she was weighing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke. "I know who you are. I know where you came from." The mechanic froze, his heart skipping a beat. How could this girl possibly know anything about him? He hadn't told anyone, not in years. He'd left his past behind, locked it away where no one could find it. But now here she was, a little girl claiming to know things he had buried so deep. How was that possible? Her voice broke through his thoughts. "I know why you left," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "I know why you ran." The words hit him like a jolt of electricity. He felt his stomach tighten, his breath catch in his throat. He tried to stay calm, to keep his composure, but it was impossible. How did she know? How could she? He thought back to the time when he had made that choice. the decision that had driven him to leave everything behind. He had hoped to escape, to forget, but it seemed that someone, this little girl, had found out the truth. The girl continued, her voice barely a whisper. "I remember you." The mechanic's heart raced, his mind swirling with 100 questions. How could she remember him? He had left when he was young, and there was no way she could possibly know anything about him. But her words, her certainty, made him feel as though everything he had ever known was slipping away. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice trembling. "How do you know all this?" The girl's eyes softened and she gave a small, sad smile. "I'm the one you left behind." The mechanic felt the ground shift beneath him. The world suddenly seemed much smaller, the walls of the room closing in around him. For a moment he couldn't speak. His mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. She couldn't be. Could she? Could she really be the one he had left behind so many years ago? He looked at her, really looked at her, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This was no random child. She wasn't just some lost girl asking for help. She was connected to his past, to a time he had tried to forget, a time he thought was long gone. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy. The girl's eyes never left his, and in that moment the mechanic knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever secret she had, whatever truth she was about to reveal, was going to change everything. He had no idea what to expect. But one thing was certain. He couldn't turn back now. The mechanic sat down across from the little girl, still trying to make sense of what she had just said. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though the walls were closing in on him. Her words echoed in his mind. "I'm the one you left behind." How could that be possible? He had left long ago without a trace and never looked back. It wasn't just about a decision, it was an escape. His escape. Yet here she was, sitting right in front of him, saying things he couldn't ignore. She wasn't someone from his past that he could push aside. This girl wasn't a figment of his imagination or some passing stranger. She had deep knowledge, and the weight of her words was crushing him. The silence between them stretched on, thick with the tension neither of them dared to break. The girl's gaze remained locked on him, her eyes seeming to pierce through him as though she could see into his very soul. He tried to steady his breathing, but it was difficult. The air felt heavy, as if he was being suffocated by everything that was left unsaid. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and uncertain. "I don't understand. How could you possibly be the one I left behind?" The girl's small hand gripped the edge of the couch, her knuckles turning white, but her eyes never wavered. "You were supposed to stay," she said quietly, almost like a whisper, but the words held so much weight that the mechanic felt as though they had been shouted in his face. His chest tightened. He had left. He had run away to get away from everything he couldn't deal with. He had made that decision years ago. But hearing this girl speak so directly, so assuredly, made him question everything he thought he knew. He tried to push the thoughts away, to lock them back in the box he had spent so long keeping sealed, but it was no use. She continued, her voice gaining strength. "I was waiting for you. You never came back." Her eyes were filled with something, the kind of sadness that you couldn't ignore, that made you want to do whatever you could to take it away. But the mechanic didn't know how. He had run, hadn't he? He had abandoned everything and everyone, and now it seemed like he was being confronted by the consequences. He stood up, pacing back and forth in the small living room, trying to make sense of it. His head was spinning. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to sound firm, but the words felt hollow. "I left this town a long time ago. I don't even remember." The girl's voice interrupted him, soft but steady. "You remember me? You remember what you did?" He froze. His heart stopped. She couldn't be talking about that, could she? The memory, the thing he had buried deeper than anything else, was now surfacing again, and he could no longer escape it. The guilt, the shame, it flooded him in waves. "No," he said, shaking his head as though that simple action could erase everything. I didn't do anything. I didn't mean to leave. I just had to. It was for the best." But the girl wasn't convinced. She simply stared at him, her small face filled with an understanding far beyond her years. It was as though she could see through his excuses and could read every thought in his mind. "For the best?" she asked quietly. "Is that really what you believe?" The mechanic didn't have an answer for her. He couldn't even look her in the eye anymore. He was afraid that if he did, she would see through him completely. She had already seen too much. The silence stretched out again, this time more painful than before. The girl finally broke it. "I'm sick," she said. "I don't have much time. But before I go, I want you to know the truth. I want you to know why you're here." The mechanic's eyes snapped back to her, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean, why I'm here?" She smiled faintly, her lips curling up just slightly. "You're here because you need to face what you've been running from. All these years, you've been hiding from yourself, but it's time to stop." He shook his head, his thoughts spinning out of control. "No, you don't understand. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I had no choice." "You always had a choice," she responded softly, her voice filled with a kind of wisdom that belied her age. "You just didn't want to make it. You didn't want to face the truth." The words stung, but they were undeniably true. The mechanic knew it deep down. He had made a choice to leave, to abandon everything that mattered. He had thought that by running, he could escape his past. But now here it was, staring him in the face in the form of this sick little girl who claimed to know everything about him. Everything he had tried to forget. His stomach twisted with regret, but he couldn't speak. There were no words that could undo the damage he had caused. No actions that could fix what was broken. All he could do now was listen. "I'm not angry with you," she said, and her words hit him like a cold wave. "I just want you to know why I'm here, why I'm still waiting for you." "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why are you waiting for me?" "Because you left without saying goodbye," she replied. "Because I thought you would come back. But you didn't, and now—" She paused, her eyes filling with tears, though she made no move to wipe them away. "Now I'm dying and you're here. You're here to face the truth you've been avoiding." The mechanic felt the air leave his lungs. He had never felt so small in his life. How had it come to this? How had it all unraveled so completely? "I'm sorry," he whispered, though the words seemed insignificant, not nearly enough to undo everything. He had made so many mistakes, hurt so many people along the way, but now it felt too late to fix any of it. He was trapped, caught between the past he had tried to outrun and the present that was too painful to confront. The girl's gaze softened, and she reached out to take his hand, her grip weak but steady. "It's not too late," she said. "You still have time. You can still make things right, but how? How could he possibly make things right? The weight of everything that had happened, everything he had done, pressed down on him. It felt impossible, but there was something in her eyes, something in the way she spoke that made him want to believe it. He wasn't sure how, but somehow he knew he had to try. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, he could make amends, but the question still remained, how? The mechanic couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away, that something urgent was happening right before him. The girl's words, still fresh in his mind, seemed to hold a power he couldn't ignore. "You still have time. You can still make things right." Those words had made him believe, if only for a moment, that there was still a chance to undo everything he had done. But could he really make things right? Could he go back to the person he had been all those years ago? Could he face the truth he had buried so deeply and still find a way to fix things? The silence between them stretched out again, this time more suffocating than before. The girl, weak and frail, lay back against the worn cushions of the couch. Her eyes were closed, but she still held his hand with a gentle grip. There was something in her touch, something that calmed him, as though she was trying to guide him, to help him see what he couldn't yet see. The mechanic stared at the floor, trying to gather his thoughts. The weight of the past pressed down on him, a burden so heavy that it seemed impossible to lift. He had made so many mistakes. He had hurt so many people, including this little girl, though he didn't know how. She had said she was waiting for him, but waiting for what? Waiting for him to fix the past, to return, to say things that had never been said? "I don't know how to fix this," the mechanic muttered, more to himself than to her. His voice was hoarse, filled with the weight of regret. "I don't know how to fix what I've done." The girl stirred slightly, but didn't open her eyes. "You start by facing it," she said softly, her voice still weak but filled with a strength that surprised him. "You start by stopping the running. Running." The word echoed in his mind. He had been running for so long, running from the truth, running from his past. The very idea of returning to it felt foreign, impossible. He had convinced himself that leaving was the only way to survive. But now, as he sat here with this girl, who seemed to hold the key to his redemption, he realized that running was no longer an option. The past had a way of catching up, and it had caught up with him in the most unexpected way. "I don't know if I can face it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." For the first time, the girl opened her eyes, her gaze steady and unblinking. "You are," she said simply, as if she had no doubt in her mind. "You just have to believe it." The mechanic stared at her, unsure of what to say. Her certainty, her quiet confidence was both comforting and unsettling. She was so young, so fragile, yet she spoke with a wisdom that felt beyond her years. How could she know all of this? How could she know what he had done, what he had left behind? "You know," the mechanic said, his voice tinged with sadness, "when I left, I thought I was protecting everyone. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving. But now," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He couldn't bring himself to say the words. The guilt was too much, the regret too overwhelming. "You weren't protecting anyone," the girl said softly. "You were hiding. You were hiding from the pain, from the responsibility, and in doing so, you hurt people." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He knew it was true. He had tried to escape the pain, but all he had done was pass it on to others. He had thought he could outrun it, but he couldn't. No one could. "I'm sorry," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I'm so sorry." The girl gave him a small smile, a faint flicker of warmth in her eyes. "It's not too late to make it right," she said again, as if she were repeating the words just for him. You still have time, but what could he do? How could he possibly make amends for the years he had spent running? He didn't even know where to begin. The room fell silent again, and for a long moment the mechanic simply sat there, holding the girl's hand, thinking about all that had happened. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he also knew that he couldn't keep running from it. He had to face it. He had to stop hiding. And then, in the quiet of the room, an idea began to form in his mind. A way to begin. A way to move forward. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to fix everything, but it was a start. It was a way to finally stop running. "Maybe," he said slowly, as if testing the idea, "maybe I can start by going back to the people I left behind. I don't know if they'll forgive me, but I have to try. I have to face them." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "It's a start," she said. "That's all you can do." The mechanic stood up, his legs a little shaky, but there was something different in him now. A determination, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years he felt like he was ready to face it. He looked at the girl one last time, her face peaceful, her grip on his hand gentle but strong. He didn't know how much longer she had, but he promised himself that he would do everything he could to make things right, starting with going back. He owed it to her, to the people he had left behind, and most of all, to himself. The girl's smile faded into a peaceful expression. The mechanic felt a strange sense of finality as he walked out of the small apartment above his shop. The weight of everything that had been said between him and the girl lingered in his mind, heavy and unrelenting. He wasn't sure how much longer she had, but the decision had been made. He would go back. He would face the people he had abandoned all those years ago. It wasn't going to be easy. In fact, it would likely be the hardest thing he had ever done. But it was the only way to start the process of healing, for both him and the people he had left behind. The town was quiet as he stepped out into the street. The air was cool, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden light over the buildings. The mechanic couldn't help but notice how little had changed. The town still felt like the same place he had left behind all those years ago. The same shops lined the main street. The same people walked by, oblivious to the storm that had just stirred in his heart. As he walked toward his truck, he couldn't help but think about the people he would have to face. There was the man who had been like a father to him, the one who had given him a place to stay when he was younger. There was also the woman who had been his close friend, the one he had hurt the most when he left. The guilt weighed heavily on him as he thought about them. What would they say when they saw him again? Would they even want to see him? Would they understand why he had left? Or would they resent him for abandoning them without a word? The questions filled his mind, each one more troubling than the last. But deep down he knew that these were questions he had to answer. He couldn't move forward without confronting the past. He reached his truck and climbed in, the engine rumbling to life beneath him. He drove slowly through the town, the familiar streets unfolding before him. As he passed by the old diner, he saw a familiar face through the window, the man he had once called his mentor. The man who had taken him in all those years ago when he had no one else. The mechanic's heart skipped a beat. Should he stop? Should he talk to him now? Or should he wait until he had more of a plan? He felt an overwhelming urge to pull into the parking lot, but at the same time, he wasn't sure if he was ready. The thought of facing the man he had once looked up to, the one who had given him everything, filled him with both fear and hope. He drove past the diner, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He couldn't do it, not yet. He wasn't ready. The truck rattled down the familiar roads, taking him farther from the town and into the hills that surrounded it. It was a quiet drive, the kind of drive that forced him to think, to confront the things he had been running from. The girl's words echoed in his mind. You still have time. You can still make things right. He couldn't deny it. She was right. It wasn't too late. But the longer he waited, the harder it would be to do what needed to be done. As he drove, his thoughts drifted back to the girl. He didn't know how long she had, but he felt a sense of urgency now. He had promised her that he would do what he could to make things right, but the fear in his chest was overwhelming. The thought of going back to the people he had abandoned, the people who had every right to be angry with him, made his stomach twist. The road wound through the hills, the landscape growing more and more familiar as he neared the old house. His heart began to race, and he had to force himself to slow down. The house wasn't far now. He could almost see it through the trees, its familiar outline standing against the fading light of the day. The house had once been his home, the place where he had grown up, where he had learned what it meant to love and be loved. It had been a place of comfort, but also a place of pain. The memories of his childhood were tangled with the choices he had made, the things he had left behind. As he reached the end of the road, he stopped the truck in front of the house. He sat there for a moment, just staring at it. The windows were dark, the front porch empty. It looked like no one had been home for a while. But it was still the same house, the same place where everything had started. The mechanic took a deep breath and stepped out of the truck. His legs were shaky, but he forced himself to move forward. Each step felt like a battle, but he couldn't stop now. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. He walked up to the front door and knocked softly, the sound echoing in the stillness of the evening. There was no answer at first, and he felt his heart sink. Had they really moved on? Had he really been forgotten? Just as he was about to turn away, the door creaked open, and the familiar face of the woman he had once loved appeared in the doorway. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It was as if time had stopped and the years between them had disappeared in an instant. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unkind. She hadn't changed much, though there was a weariness in her face that hadn't been there before. The years had taken their toll on both of them, but it was clear that she hadn't forgotten him. The mechanic swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know where to begin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. For leaving. For hurting you." She looked at him for a long moment, and then, to his surprise, she stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's a start." He stepped inside, the smell of old wood and dust filling his nose. It was the same house, but everything felt different now. The walls seemed to close in, and he felt the weight of the years pressing down on him. He had made it this far. He was home. The mechanic stood in the doorway of the house, feeling as though the past was finally catching up with him. The silence between him and the woman he once loved seemed to stretch out indefinitely. Her presence, though calm, was charged with unspoken questions and emotions. She had every right to be angry with him, to feel betrayed, and yet here she was, standing quietly, allowing him to speak, to try and make things right. "I'm sorry," he repeated, though the words felt too small, too insignificant to truly express everything he was feeling. "I didn't know how to come back. I didn't know how to face everything I left behind. But I'm here now." The woman didn't say anything at first. She simply motioned for him to sit down, leading him to the same worn couch they had sat on together so many times before. The room, though familiar, seemed to have changed. Time had etched its mark on everything. The once bright, cheerful space now felt quiet, muted, as though it had been holding its breath for all these years. "I never understood why you left," she finally said, her voice soft but filled with a depth of emotion. You just walked away without a word, without a reason. All these years I kept wondering what happened. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me enough to stay? The mechanic's heart ached as he heard her words. He had thought that leaving was the best choice. He had told himself that he was protecting everyone by getting away, but hearing her speak so plainly, so honestly, made him realize how much he had hurt her, and how much he had hurt himself in the process. I thought it was the only way, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I thought if I stayed, I'd only make things worse. I was afraid of what I'd become. Afraid of what I couldn't change. I left because I thought it was easier for everyone. The woman's expression softened, but her eyes still held that quiet sadness. You don't get to decide what's easier for me. You don't get to decide what's easier for anyone. You should have stayed. You should have faced it with us, not run away. The mechanic nodded, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. He had always thought he was doing the right thing, but now he could see just how wrong he had been. The past was no longer something he could hide from, no matter how far he ran. I was wrong, he whispered. I was wrong to leave, and I'm sorry for all the pain I caused. There was another long silence, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of understanding, of reflection. The woman's gaze softened as she looked at him, and for the first time in years, he felt as though they were truly seeing each other again. Not as the people they had been when everything fell apart, but as they were now, broken but still standing. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But I don't know if I can't either. I don't know what this is yet, but I'm willing to talk. I'm willing to try. The mechanic felt a small flicker of hope, but it was tempered with the understanding that forgiveness couldn't be rushed. It couldn't be forced. It had to be earned slowly over time. He nodded. I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just wanted you to know that I'm here now. I'm not running anymore. I want to try. The woman looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. And then she did something that surprised him. She reached out, placing her hand on top of his. The touch was soft, hesitant, but it spoke volumes more than words ever could. I don't know where we go from here, she said, but I'm willing to find out. The mechanic felt a wave of relief wash over him, though he knew it wasn't the end of the journey. It wasn't the end of the work that lay ahead. But it was a start, a beginning. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years he felt like he had a chance to make it right, to build something from the ashes of what he had left behind. Later that evening, after the conversation had slowed, and they had both shared small pieces of their lives since he left, the mechanic finally stood up, ready to leave. There was still a part of him that was afraid of what he had yet to face, but there was also something else, a sense of possibility. He had no answers, no clear path, but he knew he wasn't running anymore. I need to go, he said, his voice steady, but I'll be back. I don't know when, but I'll be back. I want to keep working on this. The woman nodded, her eyes soft. I'll be here, she said simply. We'll see where this goes. As the mechanic walked out of the house and into the cool night, the stars above seemed a little brighter. The weight that had been on his shoulders for so long didn't feel quite as heavy. He still had a long road ahead of him, and he didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing still, facing the future, and hoping for the first time in years. And in that moment, as he climbed into his truck and started the engine, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet, tentative peace. He was no longer alone with his guilt. He wasn't hiding from his mistakes. He was stepping forward, ready to take responsibility, ready to rebuild what he had broken. It wasn't going to be easy. It was going to take time, patience, and understanding, but he was willing to try. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The mechanic didn't look back as he walked toward his truck. The old house behind him felt like a distant memory now, a place where things had once been but no longer were. He couldn't quite explain the feeling in his chest, half hope, half uncertainty, but it felt like something had shifted. He had walked into that house a man weighed down by his past, but he was leaving it a little lighter, a little freer. The truck's engine started with a familiar hum. He pulled away slowly, his mind still wrestling with the conversation that had just unfolded. There was no grand resolution, no sudden change, but there was something else, something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. He wasn't sure what that chapter would look like, But at least it was a chapter he would face with open eyes, not the closed-off heart that had led him to run in the first place. As he drove, the landscape blurred past him, fields, trees, and the winding roads that had once been his escape route. Every mile that passed felt like a step away from the place he had been hiding, and toward a place he wasn't sure he was ready to find. But even though the uncertainty still gripped him, something else was there too. A quiet resolve. He had made the first step. He had confronted the past. Now he had to keep moving forward. His thoughts shifted back to the girl. It felt strange to call her a girl, for she had been so much more than that in his mind. She was a key, a symbol of the redemption he so desperately sought, and her words echoed in his ears, urging him to face the truth. "You still have time," she had said. "You can still make things right." He didn't know what making things right looked like. Maybe it was just showing up like he had today. Maybe it was something deeper, something that would take time. But what he knew without a doubt was that he couldn't keep running. He had already spent too many years doing that, and now it was time to make a real change. The road twisted ahead, and the small town came into view. It was strange how nothing seemed to change, how everything looked the same even though he felt so different. The same old buildings, the same faces, people going about their lives without any awareness of the quiet storm that had been stirring inside him. He passed the old diner again, the one he had nearly stopped at before. His heart clenched as he thought about the man inside. His mentor, the person who had given him so much, who had always believed in him. The mechanic's hand tightened on the wheel. He had to face him too. There was no more running, not anymore. As he pulled into the diner parking lot, he hesitated for a moment. The air felt thick, as though the building itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for him, for the man inside. Or maybe it was just waiting for the quiet echoes of the past to be dealt with. He stepped out of the truck, the door creaking as he swung it open. The small bell above the diner door chimed softly as he walked in, and the familiar scent of fried food and coffee greeted him. The diner hadn't changed much over the years. Still cozy, still warm, with the same booth in the corner where he had shared so many meals, so many conversations. The man was sitting at the counter, his back turned, a cup of coffee in front of him. The mechanic stood there for a moment, just watching. The man hadn't noticed him yet, but the mechanic could see the weariness in his shoulders, the way he slouched slightly, as though the years had taken their toll on him too. Finally, he took a step forward. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said, his voice low, almost unsure. The man turned, his face breaking into a slow smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "Neither did I, kid," he replied. "But here you are." The mechanic sat down beside him, his hands resting on the counter, unsure of what to say next. He had so many apologies in his heart, so many things he wished he could take back, but he wasn't sure where to start. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, the words almost getting stuck in his throat. "I should have never left. I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was wrong." The man studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "You were young," he said simply. "I didn't agree with what you did, but I understand why you did it. We all do things in our lives that we regret. But you're here now. That's what matters." The mechanic felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. "I'm trying," he said, his voice more steady now. "I'm trying to make things right. I don't know how, but I know I have to face the people I left behind. I can't keep running." The man looked at him for a long moment, and then his gaze softened. "You never really left, you know. I always knew you'd come back when you were ready. We all knew it. It's just good to see you here, finally ready to face what you've been running from." The mechanic didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the world was against him. He didn't feel like the man he used to be, the one who had abandoned everything. He felt like a man on the verge of becoming something better, something whole. They sat there for a while in silence, the clink of dishes and quiet chatter around them. The old man didn't push him to talk more. He simply let the mechanic take the time he needed, offering him a kind of patience that only time and experience could provide. Finally, the mechanic stood up, his legs a little less shaky than they had been earlier. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "For understanding." The man smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Don't thank me yet. You've still got a long road ahead of you, but you're on the right path now." The mechanic nodded and turned to leave, the door chiming behind him. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, he felt something inside him shift. He wasn't sure if it was peace or just the beginning of peace, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he could breathe. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. The road ahead seemed less daunting now, less heavy. He wasn't running anymore. He was going forward, step by step, ready to face whatever came next. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that, but he also knew that he had to keep going, one step at a time. As the truck hummed down the road, he thought about the girl again. He had promised her that he would try, that he wouldn't give up, and for the first time in years he felt like he had a real chance at keeping that promise. The mechanic drove for hours that evening, the road stretching out ahead of him like a ribbon that never seemed to end. The weight of everything that had happened in the past few days still pressed on him, but it didn't feel as heavy as it had before. Something had shifted inside him. Something had clicked into place. He was no longer just running. He wasn't hiding from the truth anymore, and that made all the difference. He had made the first move by confronting his past. Now it was time to keep moving, to show that he was willing to face whatever came next. It was terrifying, but there was also a strange peace in it, a peace he hadn't felt in years. As he passed through the quiet streets of the town, he couldn't help but notice the things that had changed. There were new businesses in the place of the old ones, new faces that he didn't recognize. But there were also things that hadn't changed at all. The same old diner, the same small park with the swing set where he had spent so many afternoons as a boy. The past was still here, but so was the future. He was beginning to realize that the past wasn't something to be feared. It wasn't something to run from. It was something to learn from, to understand, and to use as a stepping stone to build something better. The night air felt cool as he pulled into the small gas station on the edge of town. He hadn't planned on stopping, but something about the place felt familiar, comforting. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent lights buzzed above him or the scent of gasoline and old rubber that hung in the air. Maybe it was just that after everything, he needed a moment to himself, a moment to breathe, to reflect. He stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching under his boots as he walked toward the small convenience store. The place was nearly empty, save for a lone cashier behind the counter who didn't even glance up as he walked in. The mechanic didn't mind. He wasn't looking for conversation. He just needed a moment to think, to process everything that had happened. As he grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler, he felt the weight of the day start to settle in. The meeting with the woman, the quiet understanding they had shared, the forgiveness that was slowly beginning to take root. It was a lot to take in. But as he stood there in the dimly lit store, he couldn't help but feel that something was changing within him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. He paid for the water and stepped back outside, the cool night air hitting his face as he walked back to the truck. He wasn't sure where he was going next, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going back to the way things were. He had taken the first step, and now he was going to keep walking forward. The drive continued, the miles stretching out in front of him like an endless horizon. He thought about the girl again, the one who had first given him the courage to face everything he had been running from. Her words still echoed in his mind, a reminder that there was still time to make things right. He had promised her that he would try, that he wouldn't give up, and he was starting to believe it. But there was still so much to be done. He hadn't seen the people who mattered most in so many years, and he knew that facing them wouldn't be easy. He had a lot of apologies to make, a lot of bridges to rebuild, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for it. As he turned onto a quiet country road, the night stretching out around him, he found himself thinking about the man he had once looked up to, the mentor who had been like a father to him. He hadn't seen him in years, but he knew that the next step in his journey would be to face him. He had so much to apologize for, so much to explain. But more than that, he knew that the man deserved to hear the truth about why he had left, why he had disappeared without a word. The road ahead seemed endless, But it wasn't as intimidating as it had been before. It felt like a path he was meant to walk, a path that would lead him back to where he belonged, back to the people who had always been there for him, even when he had been too afraid to see it. As the hours passed, he felt a sense of calm begin to settle over him. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he was going in the right direction. The world around him seemed to quiet, the sounds of the night blending together into a peaceful hum. It was as if the universe was telling him that he had made the right choice, that he was finally on the path he had been avoiding for so long. He stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town, the neon sign buzzing in the distance. The place was familiar, but it felt different now. He wasn't sure what had changed, but he knew that it wasn't just the diner, it was him. He had changed. He had faced his past, and now he was ready to face the future. The mechanic walked inside, the bell above the door chiming as he entered. The same old faces were there, the same regulars sitting at the counter sipping coffee and talking about nothing in particular. He recognized a few of them, but most of them didn't recognize him. It had been so long. He wasn't sure if he was ready for them to recognize him, not yet. But maybe someday he would be. He sat down at the counter ordering a cup of coffee. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes, poured him a steaming mug and set it down in front of him. She didn't say anything, just moved on to the next table as if she hadn't even noticed him. The mechanic wasn't offended. He didn't expect any special treatment. He was just another face, another stranger passing through. But that didn't bother him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't mind being anonymous. As he sipped the coffee, his thoughts turned inward. He had a lot of work to do, so much to rebuild, so much to mend. He didn't know how long it would take, or if the people he had left behind would ever truly forgive him. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that he was finally facing the truth. He was no longer running. He had promised the girl that he wouldn't give up. And he wouldn't. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard it was, he was going to keep trying. Because that was the only way to make things right. To move forward, one step at a time. The mechanic finished his coffee, paid for it, and stood up, his heart a little lighter than it had been when he had walked in. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like something he could face. He stepped out of the diner and into the night, ready for whatever came next.